All right, good. Good morning, everybody. Everybody make it through the awards dinner, all right? Unscathed, all right? Likewise. I probably should have slept a little bit more, but, you know, that's how these things go. So, you know, just thanks to MEF and of course, all of the sponsors for having me and putting this all together for you guys. Today, I think, is a particularly good agenda, so I'm glad that you guys are in the room. We're first going to hear from the enterprise side, which, of course, I think is super important for all of you in the room to be thinking about why are we doing this? How can it actually apply to the needs of network managers and whatnot out there in the real world? And what are they actually going to use NaaS and some of these other services for? So I'm really excited for this first talk. We're going to get what users need most from NaaS solution providers. Again, this is one that you probably want to be taking notes on, right? So I'm happy to invite to the stage Radhika Venkatraman from Cerberus Capital Management, who's the senior advisor there. So, Radhika? Welcome.
Thank you. Maybe I take the clicker. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And Greg, thank you so much for the welcome. And it's really a pleasure to be here this morning. What I thought I would do today is, you know, even though I'm actually not a CIO right this very minute, I've been a CIO and CDO at Credit Suisse and also at Verizon, and thought I would provide a perspective of what the application CIOs and the chief data and digital officers often face as a challenge, and what are some things maybe this group could offer as solutions. So we'll get started now. Just by way of background, I thought I would just offer you what I have done before. I've been in telecom for 20 years, financial services for over 5 years, and currently working with a number of you know, private equities as well as venture capitalists, working with Gen AI startups that are attempting to scale up. Currently working with Cerberus as a senior advisor and chairman and CEO of one of their portfolio companies. So extensive background in telecom, media, as well as finance. What do we think is really top of mind when you think of most CIOs and CDOs and so on? I think there's a number of big challenges, right? First and foremost, when you start thinking about it in the day of a life of a CIO or a CDO, they're often thinking about, how do I tackle security risk, ops risk? I mean, all of the time, their primary focus is, how do I do technical debt reduction? How do I manage my remote workforce? And how do I manage the rising costs? While everybody in the business really wants them to focus on growing the business and doing that responsibly, they're often also having to worry about the fundamental nuts and bolts of the organization. And they have to do all of this while continuing to change and manage enormous amounts of legacy. If any of you would just get a scale of it in financial services, there's more than 6,500 systems in a place like Credit Suisse. And if you think of something like Verizon, it's of course less than that, still not insignificant, always running into the thousands. And add all of this, the talent arms race, it's very difficult to hire top-notch talent that can tackle this very multidimensional problem, if you will. Now, do they have the time and do they have the ability to keep track of these many major technology shifts? As you can know, industries are built on these major trends. So when you start to think about Gen AI, I don't know if anybody can get by a single morning without thinking of Gen AI, because it's popped right at you. It's probably on top of Financial Times, on New York Times, or Wall Street Journal, or any of that. So everybody is starting to think about Gen AI. I'll talk more about that. They're starting to think about AI, ML. They already were, but all of a sudden, those that were not even very mature with AI, ML has to sort of jump into the Gen AI, if you will. Cloud, we think, is like table stakes, but it really is not table stakes in many industries. When I joined Credit Suisse, you know, the beginning of cloud wasn't even there. There's a lot more cloud going on right now in financial services, but I would still say 80+% of the workloads are still sitting in the data centers, and big companies are still adding 2 to 4 data centers just this year with hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment going there. So forget about next-gen computing, right? Some of them are dabbling in it. Many of them don't have the ability to even think about it. They have to be thinking about platform ecosystems for their business partners, because traditional telecoms as well as financial services have always been very much of a pipe approach, full stack. They own the customer and every bit and bob. Distributed ledger technology, now we think of it mostly only as blockchain, but that technology has tremendous value when you start to think about even data anonymization and so on. Cybersecurity, I don't think I need to say enough to this team. You probably know way more. And connectivity, I won't say more on that. And then when you start thinking about the future of digital automation, 3D, 4D printing, digital twin, all that become very important. So think about this landscape, combine it with what I just showed the previous page. That's sort of what they have to be thinking about all the time, particularly if they want to be influencing digital transformation. I thought I would just offer a very simple perspective of how companies generally think of it from a strategy. And this is actually not that everybody uses this. I would say I sort of use this as the general way to think about how I would run my organization. Of course, we're there primarily to support the business and create value, but you couldn't do that if you didn't have a very strong and powerful architecture, and you wouldn't be able to do that all by yourself, so you need strategic partners, and if it does not deliver real ROI, then you're not going to get much attention. And lastly, of course, if you don't have the right talent and the culture, then everything else becomes quite redundant. But I thought I would pause and spend a little bit of time particularly around strategic partners. When it comes to build versus buy, I think very many companies are in different spectrums, if you will. I mean, many companies in financial services historically have always been a build organization. They hardly ever buy, they build everything. Telecom, I thought, was a mixed bag, and then there are some others that are only buy. But when it comes to network, I think you have a unique advantage. Most companies, including financial services that spend billions, think of network as something they would buy, even though they do tend to run managed network services in-house in some of the bigger companies. They at least tend to think of it as a buy. But what they never think when it comes to network is that they could experiment, they could ideate, and that the network companies could actually provide thought leadership. That is not how the economic buyer is thinking about the networking company. So I think that's a huge opportunity for people in this room to start thinking about how you have a podium to actually sell a very large quantity, but how you could actually start engaging the line level CIOs and the CDOs in ideation and experimentation. So we'll come and talk more about that. I thought that was something I just wanted to offer up for this team. But when a CIO is attempting to execute their strategy, what are some of the very big challenges they face? First and foremost, if you want to make any large digital transformation, super important that you understand what the needs of the clients are, and then you have to be able to do an extensive change management across the company. So more than any new software, it's really massive change management. And then on top of it, think about the front to back data, extremely complex. The infrastructure is usually very, very old, and then they have to focus on technical debt. We talked a little bit of build versus buy, and yet you will see most companies thinking that they need to buy things that are less strategic, and they need to build things that are more strategic, instead of thinking that maybe even when it comes to strategic, they could be buying. So that's something they have to think through. Most of the time, the ROI is never clearly understood. Before you start any project, you're not putting the time to understand the ROI. There's not enough instrumentation in order to really understand and capture the benefits. And so, most of the time, the transformation becomes that of the CDO, the CIO, et cetera, and then the business is not fully vested in the outcome, if you will. And then, of course, like creating a full stack team, meaning teams that understand everything from front to back, is very, very difficult. I mean, when I first joined Credit Suisse and we were trying to put together a data strategy, there were not even 10 people that understood anything front to back. Eventually, the one that we needed to submit to the Fed needed well over 300 people to come together in order to even understand all the nuanced differences from all the way to trade to things going into the general ledger. And then, of course, on top of all of this, can you imagine generative AI? People think that you can search pretty much like Google and get all kinds of intelligence and real-time situational awareness of your company using something like a ChatGPT UI. That is what the expectation has come to be, but then you're also dealing with this enormous complexity before you can actually get to that hoped stage, if you will, of nirvana with Gen AI. So when you think of that, okay, so you got Gen AI coming, and then you have that backdrop. So where are we? Where are the companies really? I think in the last 9-10 months, what we have seen is an exponential interest, but the exponential interest has not resulted in exponential adoption. We're seeing less than 10% of the companies have really adopted. Many are doing POCs, and very few of them actually have usable production applications. The biggest challenge that most companies face is that in order for Gen AI to be useful, there is a lot of training data that needs to be provided to it. And as many of you know, data needs to stay within the security perimeter, at least when you think of the Fortune 200 companies. And if they're hesitant to move that data out of the security perimeter, you can imagine you'll have to start building all kinds of virtual private clouds. Makes this all very expensive. But then when you start having large-scale VPC, not every company has embarked on that cloud journey yet to be able to do this. Cost of inference today is extremely expensive. First of all, inference is a quadratic problem, and on top of it, keeping context and being able to get meaningful outputs is very, very expensive. Layer that with all of the supply chain shortages. So if you start to think about the challenges with respect to availability of boards that only TSMC has and so on, now even if you want chips, it's at least 52 weeks before you can get those chips. And you don't have very many talented people that really understand natural language processing and understand how to fine-tune the models and so on. And then I don't know that too many companies have very robust compliance, legal, or ethical frameworks, right? So there's all of this that has to be considered before you can start creating any meaningful application. So what I thought I would do is actually leave this room with a set of questions. I don't have answers for any of them, but hopefully it will allow you to start thinking about what some of you may want to consider doing. So my first open question is, can the networking companies really start building or creating inference chips and embed AI at the network edge? I mean, that's really a big question, because the round trip and the latency, is one going to kill real-time chatbots and so on. But even more than that, if you start wanting lots of context, and every time you ask a question, and if you have to wait for like 5 or 10 minutes before something comes back, the very purpose of using Gen AI is sort of gone. Because if you're thinking about AI-assisted human, you want everything done in like sub-second response time. So then the question about data security. If your data cannot leave the security perimeter of a company, how can network companies partner with hyperscalers in new ways? I don't mean in old ways, but in new ways. So then, everybody will say, well, like the cloud is already an extension of the edge, but what does that really mean in the context of Gen AI? What does that even mean? I mean, today, the only way that we do it is using the H100, A100 chips, etc. Today, it's not, LLMs don't work on a CPU. LLMs don't work well even on non-NVIDIA companies as well as they work on the NVIDIA chipsets. That's the experience I have. I'm sure there are other people working very, very actively, but it's currently not available. So what does it really mean? The question then for all of the companies that offer networking then is, can you really play a creative role? Because you go there, you have the mind share of the buyer for network, but if you can do some of these other things, can you start creating new kinds of hardware that you can drop along with your network that comes preloaded with Gen AI. So that's something for you to think about. Maybe some hardware systems integrator working in partnership with network. And then, of course, a forum like this, can you enable like multimodal LLM? Because, I mean, this is all first gen and just text and data. Imagine when you start talking about images and sound and video and so on and so forth, how intense these LLMs are going to become. So, that's the next frontier, if you will, for LLMs. With that, I wish to thank you all for your attention and open the floor for a few questions. Whoa, I think everybody needs another cup of coffee. Thank you very, oh, there's a question there, yeah. Yes, of course.
So, in the financial industry, how are you dealing with AI hallucination? If you try to use, GPTs for, making financial decisions or projections or things like that, how do you factor that into?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, how are the financial services industries attempting to use LLM where you have hallucination and so on? One of the things that you have to keep in mind is you have to, first of all, use an enterprise-ready generative AI stack. You cannot just use open source where you have the fear of your data moving back into the internet. The big trick about reducing hallucination is really about using smaller LLMs. That is becoming more and more evident as people are exploiting it for use cases, that the smaller the LLM, the likelihood of it being more accurate is very high. So you have an LLM that is fit for purpose, relatively small. Then you need to basically feed the company's data and create something called as a knowledge graph. So the LLM works with the knowledge graph, and then for each of the use cases that you're thinking about, you really need to fine-tune it. And what fine-tuning really means is like using much more targeted, smaller LLMs with very specific data and examples that are going to increase your accuracy. So it's really the combination of these three things when applied is what starts to give you good 4 nines accuracy answers that can then be used. For example, if you had 40 years of financial data and you wanted to sort of find a trend, or you wanted to summarize a 60-minute video call, or you want to take like, let's say what I just spoke about and just create like a half-a-page summary, you could actually take this and put it through an LLM and fine-tune and process it. So there are different ways in which people are using it, but almost all the ways of using it today are, human-assisted by AI or AI assisted by human. It's not just AI. I'll just leave the room with one thought. I think we know for a fact that AI is not ready to replace humans today, but human assisted by AI, I think, is ready to replace humans not assisted by AI. Thank you.